Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good evening, I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. Our top stories. Boris Johnson has warned of a global rise in anti-Semitic behaviour. The former Prime Minister made the statement while visiting a kibbutz as he continues his tour of Israel. The kibbutz was attacked by Hamas on October 7th. Mr Johnson, who arrived in the country this morning, made the trip alongside former Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison. Mr Johnson saying that innocent families were forced to protect themselves against brutal killers.
There's been no single attack like this on the Jewish people since the Second World War, and that's a matter of record. And you know what? I think that that may be because across the world, the memory and the lesson of that appalling crime, and 6 million died, the memory may be starting to fade. And it may be that what we're really seeing now in some of these marches and these demos and the unthinking way people are talking about this issue, well, we're starting to see perhaps, I really hope this isn't the case, but you're seeing more and more evidence of anti-Semitism.
Humza Yousaf's in-laws have arrived back in Scotland after being trapped in Gaza for more than 3 weeks. The First Minister posted a photo on X saying he's glad they're back home safely. The Foreign Office is pressing for the Rafah crossing to reopen to allow UK nationals to escape from Gaza. Egypt announced the suspension of evacuations following a deadly attack on an ambulance. Antony Blinken is in Turkey to continue humanitarian talks with foreign ministers. It's after the US Secretary of State met with the Palestinian president in Ramallah in the West Bank. President Abbas told him an immediate ceasefire is needed. The pair also discussed getting more aid into Gaza and efforts to restore stability to the West Bank. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Home Secretary Suella Braverman have expressed concerns about further pro-Palestine protests during Armistice Day. The Met Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, has promised to take a robust approach and to use all available powers to ensure commemorative events are not undermined. Deputy PM Oliver Dowden says that Armistice Day should be about honouring the sacrifices made by previous generations.
I have really grave concerns about this, and I think that certainly representing a large Jewish community as I do, but it's broader than the Jewish community. We should be honouring and respecting the sacrifice made by previous generations, and you certainly shouldn't have the kind of intimidation that you see in those marches.
Well, meanwhile, Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey says we live in a democracy and we must balance the right to protest.
It's an operational decision for the police. They are talking to the protest organisers who want to show their solidarity with Palestinians, and they're looking at a different place in London at a time 2 hours after the remembrance service at the Cenotaph, and I hope we'll be able to get to a situation where we're not banning the right of protest, but we're absolutely ensuring that the remembrance, recognition and honour of those people who've served and fallen to defend us in this country is fully respected.
This is GB News across the UK on television, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's time for Camilla.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. What a show we have got lined up for you today. I'm hoping that the Deputy Prime Minister can hear me and is joining us from central London as we speak. Mr Dowden, can you hear me? Thank you very, very much indeed for your time this morning. I've just been speaking to Michael Portillo about some of these allegations in the Mail on Sunday. I do need to ask you, because you were party chairman at the time, it's been suggested that the Tory party covered up a rape claim or several alleged rape claims, paid for a complainant to be sent to a private hospital rather than speak to the police. You were party chairman before Jake Berry wrote this letter alerting the authorities to what had gone on. What knowledge do you have of these events, Mr Dowden?
Well, first of all, I should factually clarify that I wasn't the immediate predecessor of Jake Berry. I don't recognise these reports, and it certainly wasn't the case when I was party chairman that there was any kind of cover-up. Indeed, I take exceptionally seriously these reports and allegations. First of all, they should be a matter for the police, but also there was an independent party complaints procedure. There can be zero tolerance of this kind of activity.
But did the party pay for the private hospital bill of a rape complainant?
Well, that's certainly not something that I signed off as chairman of the Conservative Party. I didn't have knowledge of that. I can't say for certain to you simply because I don't know the name of the complainants in question. I don't think it has, sorry, the name of the person whose fees are meant to have been paid by the party.
But I mean, surely there can't be that many people whose private hospital fees might have been paid by the party.
Well, as I say, I don't recognise this from my time as chairman of the Conservative Party, and I certainly didn't sign off something like that as
chairman. So you've got no knowledge of this. Do we think Nadine Dorries, your former Conservative colleague, is making it up, or there's no truth to it? Because we've got a letter from Jake Berry. It seems to have been quoted extensively in the Mail on Sunday.
Well, my understanding is, and I haven't read every last line of the report, that the person hasn't been named, but that's a matter for the Mail on Sunday, for Nadine Dorries and for others.
Well, the person might not have been named, but did it happen? This letter has been written by Jake Berry, your successor, suggesting that the Tory party has paid the private hospital bill of a rape complainant rather than necessarily sending her to the police station.
Well, all I can say to you is, as I've said, Camilla, I didn't sign off anything like that, and I don't recognise it myself.
So you don't have any knowledge of this having happened?
No, like I said, I was chairman of the Conservative Party. I did not sign off something like that.
Yeah, but did you have any knowledge of it having happened?
No, I'm sorry. Have I not made that clear to you?
No, so you don't have any knowledge of this story at all?
I don't know who the person is because they haven't been named, and I've also said to you that in respect of both a cover-up, I have zero knowledge of that, and we would not have covered up at all, and I certainly didn't sign off any kind of support in the way that has been described there.
OK. Let's move on to the controversy around this pro-Palestinian march on Armistice Day. Do you think this march should take place?
I have really grave concerns about this, and I think that certainly representing a large Jewish community as I do, but it's broader than the Jewish community. The Remembrance Sunday is about, and indeed Remembrance Day on the day this march is planned, is about remembering the sacrifice of previous generations, and is a solemn moment in our nation's history. And I don't personally feel that that would be appropriate. I also have concerns about the potential for violence and other misconduct. But in the end, the law of the land is that the police are operationally independent, and that's a decision for the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police.
I know, but we've heard from Sir Mark Rowley in the week saying that he doesn't think he has adequate powers to stop the march. So if the government wants the march to be stopped, if polling suggests that the public want the march to be stopped, why doesn't the Conservative government stop the march?
Well, there's a very simple process in law. And indeed, it's happened before. It happened when Theresa May was Home Secretary, when there was an English Defence League march the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police applied for that march to be banned, and she provided the authority as Home Secretary. The law sets out that it is a matter for the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police to request it of the Home Secretary. I think you've seen from the Home Secretary's comments where she's inclined to be on it, but that is the way that it works. That's how the law works.
So is Suella Braverman going to be saying to the Metropolitan Police Commissioner this week, you must stop this march? You have the powers, so can you stop it, please?
Well, I think you've seen from Suella's comments how grave her concerns are about it. And I think both in terms of the signal it sends about our society, our British society, we should be honouring and respecting the sacrifice made by previous generations. And you certainly shouldn't have the kind of intimidation that you see in those marches. And so I think her view is pretty clear on those points.
We know her views, we know your views, we know Rishi Sunak's views, but it's all talk and no action. Are you going to try and put influence on the Met Police Commissioner? If he says he has the powers or he needs the powers, either you say to him, you've got the powers, so can you please stop the march? Or you say, you don't have the powers, so we're going to introduce emergency legislation through the House as soon as the House gets back sitting after the King's speech to make sure that this march can be stopped on Saturday.
Well, there may be questions about that for the longer term, but the law as it stands is that it is for the Met to make that judgment. You've seen both the comments of the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary. I very strongly agree with that as well. I simply don't think this is appropriate. We've made that position clear to the Metropolitan Police, but ultimately we have to respect the operational independence of the police. That's how policing works in this country, and that's how the law is set up under policing acts and others going back, I think, to 1986.
You've quoted the Home Secretary there. Do you agree with her that homelessness is a lifestyle choice?
Well, I want to be in a position where we have zero rough sleeping, and to deal with that, we have to deal with both the push and the pull.
We all do, but is it a lifestyle choice?
Help people who find themselves in a position where they're... No, if you just let me explain the position, deal with the factors that lead people onto the street, whether it's drug or alcohol addiction, and we've committed over £2 billion to addressing that. Now, if ultimately people are still on the streets after that, and we're having the kind of disruption that you've seen with these tents and all these other things, we don't want a situation where those spring up across the UK. So it's right to look at taking those powers, and that's what we're doing, and as part of our legislative considerations.
But is lifestyle choice the right way to refer to homelessness, Mr. Dowden?
Well, I think that ultimately, if there are other places you can go, and the government has made sure that there are safe places for people to go, and people continue to be on the street, then we should be able to take those powers to remove them. Each individual minister is going to choose their exact words, but I agree with the sentiment of what the Home Secretary is saying, which is let's make sure people aren't on the street in the first place, because we dealt with the underlying causes of it. If people are still choosing to be on the streets, I think the government should be able to take those powers, as indeed we had under the Vagrancy Act previously.
But should we be taking rough sleepers' tents away?
Well, I think you're talking about measures in extremis. What I would much rather our focus to be, and indeed our focus as a government has been, is about dealing with the underlying causes, dealing with drug addiction, helping people with alcohol addiction. But as an extremist power, it's something that is certainly worth exploring in the way that the Home Secretary described.
Let's talk about artificial intelligence, because you're quoted in a press release this morning talking about how we might see a future where we're seeing ministers handing over their red boxes to a bot. Should we be worried about these developments? I know there's been a few fears expressed at the AI summit that the Prime Minister hosted in the week with Elon Musk about people losing their jobs because of AI. Are we now saying that the bots are going to take over the running of government, Mr. Dowden?
Well, first of all, I think we should first of all see AI as an enormous opportunity, the potential to transform humanity, whether it's challenges like diagnosing cancer, Alzheimer's and so on. We do have to address the risks, and we made progress with that at the summit this week. I think government, though, should also adopt artificial intelligence. It shouldn't be the case that artificial intelligence is driving efficiency across the private sector and the government doesn't do the same thing ourselves. And that's what we're doing. doing, whether it's in relation to assessing, say, benefit fraud, or in helping with ministerial red boxes. And what that really means is there's huge amounts of information coming in, condensing that, getting to the facts of it, and then, of course, ministers make their decisions in the proper way.
Mr Dowden, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Now, up next on the show, I'm going to be speaking to Shadow Defence Secretary Labour's John Healey, and you'll also be able to hear my exclusive interview with the renowned Canadian psychologist and Conservative thinker, Jordan Peterson.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I. So you want higher taxes? Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
First, as promised, let's bring John Healey into the conversation now. He's the Shadow Defence Secretary. Mr Healey, it's lovely to have you on the show. I think it's the first time we've spoken. So welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show, and nice to see you this morning. Now, Keir Starmer gave, I thought, a very confident and courageous speech in the week where he talked about the fact that he did not want to call for a ceasefire because he didn't think that was the right solution for Israel and indeed Gaza. But he's coming under increasing pressure, isn't he, from some of his own backbenchers. We've got 250 Labour councillors threatening to resign over this issue. It's very difficult for him to, I would say, enforce collective responsibility, even though he says himself that it's very important he does so in the party. How does he navigate this, Mr Healey?
War is difficult, as you say. Keir Starmer made a very important speech. It was a speech of a leader. He was wanting to take people with him. He was making the big arguments. He said, look, I understand why people are calling for a ceasefire, but first and foremost, Israel has the right to self-defence. That means going after Hamas fighters and their missile systems and their command centres so that they can't pose the same terror risk to Israel again in the future. But secondly, there's a very strong practical argument. And he said a ceasefire for now is not the right way, because the best chance of getting what everybody wants to see, a reduction in the civilian casualties, an alleviation of the Palestinian suffering, is by working for humanitarian pauses. It's what the US is doing, it's what the European Union is doing, it's even the UN aid chief has called for the same, saying it's the only viable option. And so Keir Starmer was making a big issue to take people with him. And in the end, there is a single common concern in the Labour Party, which is to see the alleviation of Palestinian suffering, reduce the civilian deaths, and get more aid into Gaza.
I appreciate
that. Much more likely to achieve that through pauses, not as simply a call for ceasefire.
I appreciate that he is trying to keep the party together, but it's not working very well, Mr. Healey, is it? We read in the Mail on Sunday today that there are now some MPs calling for a vote on a ceasefire. So there's a significant rebellion going on within the Labour Party on this issue, isn't there?
There isn't a significant rebellion. There is a range of different views that Keir Starmer recognises, but Keir Starmer is not a protest leader. He's making the arguments of a national politician concerned to see the best way of achieving what is a common concern about the Palestinian suffering and loss of innocent lives. More steps need to be taken to protect those, and it's a leader who wants to take people with him. But in the end, collective responsibility, a degree of discipline is required.
OK, so if a degree of discipline is required, because you're obviously looking forward perhaps to leading the country after the next general election, you're going to have lots of matters of foreign affairs to deal with, and you're going to have a number of contrarians within your own party. So how should they be disciplined? If the likes of Claudia Webb keep up this campaign, which goes against what the Labour leader is saying, should she and others lose the whip?
Well, Claudia Webb is not a Labour MP at the moment. She's been suspended from the Labour Party and is under investigation. So, look, you know, I've been a Labour MP. I've been around a long time. I've seen and been a part of the Labour Party when it's been divided. And I have to tell you, if you go back 1 month at our Labour Party conference in Liverpool, that was a unified conference, totally determined and unified in solidarity with Ukraine, behind a plan to help people with the cost of living crisis, and a determination to get rid for this country of 13 years of a failing infighting government. And underneath the current difficulties and the differences of view over this heartbreaking conflict in Israel and Gaza is a Labour Party determined to give Britain a fresh fruit.
I know, but I suppose what I'm asking is, should others face losing the whip like Webb if they express similar sentiments on Palestine, which are not in accordance with the Labour leaders?
Well, Claudia Webb was nothing at all to do with...
I know, but she's also expressed some interesting views on the conflict. So I'm using her as an example for some on the hard left of the party. Should people who adopt that kind of stance, who go against the Labour Party, actually be disciplined by losing the whip? You've taken away the whip from a number of people, including Webb, MacDonald lately, Jeremy Corbyn and others. They're all of the same groupthink. Should other MPs that express these views against what the Labour Party leader is saying face similar discipline and sanction?
Look, Jeremy Corbyn is no longer a Labour MP either. The mainstream of Labour opinion is with Keir Starmer. I think the speech and the arguments he made last week will help reassure many others that our single common concern within Labour and more widely for people who are anguished by what we see on our TV screens and in the on social media is to see a reduction in civilian casualties, more aid going into Gaza, and more hostages out, and by that creating some sort of space and confidence that allows further diplomacy in the long run to try and settle this conflict.
Mr. Healey, I wondered if you might be perhaps more equivocal than, say, unequivocal rather than, say, Oliver Dowden was when I asked him this question earlier. Should this march on Armistice Day on Saturday be stopped? Yes or no?
It will be utterly unacceptable if the march interferes with and disrespects the remembrance service at the cenotaph.
So it should go ahead.
But we're in a democracy. So we're in a democracy. We have to balance the right of free speech and to protest. It's an operational decision for the police. They are talking to the protest organisers who want to show their solidarity with Palestinians, and they're looking at a different place in London at a time 2 hours after the remembrance service at the cenotaph. And I hope we'll be able to get to a situation where we're not banning the right of protest, but we're absolutely ensuring that the remembrance, recognition and honour of those people who've served and fallen to defend us in this country is fully respected.
Why do you think that Keir Starmer seemingly felt the need to take off his poppy when he addressed the Muslim community of this country in a video?
I've absolutely no idea whether that's happened or not. If Keir Starmer was without a poppy at any stage in this present period, it will be because of something basic like having the wrong jacket or something fell out. So I'm not even sure that what you're telling me is correct. But Keir Starmer has a huge and deep respect for our armed forces. They keep us safe, and he knows, like I do, we've both served in government, that the first duty of any government is to keep the country safe and protect our citizens. And very soon after he became leader 3.5 years ago, he declared that never again will Labour go into an election not trusted on national security.
Mr Healey, thank you very much indeed for joining us for the first time on the Camilla Tominey Show this morning. Lovely to speak to you.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
the Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Now, as I have said throughout the show, earlier this week I spoke to the Canadian clinical psychologist and conservative thinker, Dr. Jordan Peterson, who sold out the O2 Arena for a speech. Peterson is an international best-selling author. His 2018 self-help book, 12 Rules for Life, has sold more than 5 million copies worldwide. Many people, particularly young men, credit Peterson with helping them turn their lives around. But he's also attracted controversy, with many on the left accusing him of promoting toxic masculinity and even misogyny. Either way, he's built a wide and loyal following with millions of followers around the world on his social media platforms, and he's become an important figure on the right of international politics. The other good thing about him is if you ask him a question, he answers it pretty straight. I caught up with him earlier in the week before his speech. Thank you for your time today. You've spoken about trying to tilt the world towards heaven and away from hell. Life feels a bit hellish at the moment if you think about the war in Ukraine, recent events in Israel. We've had a lot of divisiveness on the streets of London in recent days and weeks. Do you think that there's a way of reversing the sort of tribalism associated with, say, identity politics?
Well, we're experimenting with how to do that on a large scale this week here in London, so at the conference that's occurring around us. And do I think it's possible to reverse it? I think it's always possible to reverse it. I mean, look, Russia dumped the Soviet Union, and maybe you're not very happy with Russia at the moment, but they did decide that that totalitarian experiment was inappropriate. We locked ourselves down miserably for 2 years, absolutely pointlessly, toying with totalitarianism, copying China, in essence, very rapidly. But we decided that maybe that wasn't such a good idea and backed off. And so I don't think things are ever set so miserably that there's no hope. And certainly I don't think that's the case with the world right now, because the horizon of opportunity that's in front of us is at least as vast as the horizon of catastrophe. And I would say vaster, because I think in the final analysis, good triumphs over evil. I think it's more powerful in the final analysis, that truth is more powerful than falsehood, virtually by definition.
Although we do live in this post-truth world. I mean, we've seen around some of the debate around Israel this week of people perpetuating falsehoods. We also live in this society now where the prevailing attitude is, if you don't agree with me, then you're not just wrong, but you're a bigot and a racist and deserve to be cancelled. So,
or worse.
Or worse. So I think there's a perception that Western governments particularly have been weak on woke. They've been weak on the so-called tolerants, who are actually extremely intolerant. How does the silent majority cope with this?
Well, usually, often, too often, perhaps by putting their head in the sand. I mean, that's certainly the case in my country, because it's taken multiple dismal turns for the worst in the last 8 years. But it's led, the Liberals there were led by a very charismatic leader who's extraordinarily narcissistic and who's used compassion. Look, if you're really narcissistic and manipulative, the best disguise is compassion. And you can get very good at acting that out. And if you're very good at it, it's very hard to stand against you, because your constant excuse is, well, I'm just doing this for the good of someone else, and not only for the good of someone else, but for the good of the most oppressed and suffering. When I first came to some political trouble, let's say in Canada in 2016, I spoke up against a bill that I thought was an unwarranted intrusion into the realm of free speech and free thought, which is what it was, but it was guised in the cloak of, well, we're just caring for the least of the lesser, who was in this case people confused about their sexuality and their gender, trans people, let's say. And the immediate accusation towards me was that I was hateful and a bigot. Well, it's, why did you choose this hill to die on? Why don't you care about these poor suffering people? Can't you just use the language that would make them feel better? And then if you are also, why are the governments weak on that sort of thing? Look, I talk to conservatives and classic liberals all over the Western world, individual by individual. And although this is starting to change to some degree, they were all terrified of being torn apart by the bloodthirsty mob, and no wonder.
But then that suggests that politicians may have lost their courage. And I'm wondering what your analysis is of Rishi Sunak's...
No, the mob just got more effective.
Well, maybe. But you've met with some Conservative MPs this week.
Yeah.
I mean, has Rishi Sunak's Conservatism lost its way?
Well, he inherited a mess, to be fair, and how Boris Johnson got enticed down the net zero road is just beyond me. I think it probably had something to do with his young wife, But he swallowed hook, line, and sinker the apocalyptic narrative that implied that the only way forward into the future was to decimate poor people and to make energy more polluting and 10 times as expensive, which is rather a preposterous plan, as we can see by how it's laid itself out in the UK and even more stunningly in Germany. And poor Sunak's in a position where he has to go, that looks like it was a mistake, which isn't really a glorious vision of leadership. And I don't really know what he's supposed to do with that mess. Now, what he's been doing is rolling it back to some degree, and you might say perhaps not fast enough, and I suppose I would incline to agree with that, but by the same token, I'm glad I'm not in his shoes. What the conference here this week was designed to suggest, at least in part, was a broader vision than the mere vision of, oops, it looks like we made a mistake on the energy and environment front.
Although there are some Conservative voices, you've just touched on this in this interview, who feel like they are mooted. You hear Miriam Cates or Danny Kruger talk about the value of family, and then there are people waiting in the wings to clamp down on that. You're being sexist, you're being derogatory towards women by referencing their role in a family. You've been scapegoated by the left, some could argue, once described, I think, as, a pseudo-intellectual hero to the incel community.
That was a pretty good line, that one.
But what's your reaction to those sorts of criticisms, which must be very hurtful?
Well, they were hurtful for a good while, but after a while they just sort of became comical because they just got more and more absurd. Look, every category has an ideal at the center and a margin at the fringe. And if the center is destroyed, the margin will be demolished as well. Now, the radicals think that you can bring the margin to the center, but that's preposterous because a margin is a plurality. And if you bring the plurality to the center, you demolish everything. You demolish the category. Well, look, if you have the nuclear family as the minimal ideal, obviously you simultaneously exclude to some degree those people who aren't in that constellation. Now, so that brings up a real problem, which the leftists point out to, is like, how do you have a category, say with the family, that nuclear family as the minimal ideal, without being prejudiced against other people? And it's something like an informed and humble tolerance. Like there's divorce in my immediate family, and certainly in my extended family. My sister's been divorced, my brother's been divorced, my daughter's been divorced. Every family has people in it who are single or who are widowed, or who are in gay relationships. I mean, the family is an ideal that's breached more than it's adhered to, but that doesn't mean you get to sacrifice the ideal. And the ones who are most vulnerable and victimized by the breakdown of the nuclear family are 100% children. It's plain and absolutely simple. Children without fathers, for example, do way worse. And that if the evidence that's been accrued on that side isn't convincing to you, then no evidence about anything ever would be convincing about anything.
Although the alternative view to that would be that you are stigmatizing single mothers by saying that, because actually you could have an extremely...
I am stigmatizing single mothers.
Is that a problem, though, if you have a strong and empowered woman who is bringing up a family in the absence of a father who actually maybe their absence is welcome, maybe the dad wasn't a good influence? You'd arguably be better off with the strong mother than two weak parents.
Well, there's obviously exceptional cases where the exception is the preferable alternative. I've certainly had couples, for example, or people in my clinical practice for whom the divorce was clearly the right alternative. And they were married to people who were narcissistically psychopathic, who were making their lives absolute hell. But that doesn't mean that you get to escape from the ideal without the price of stigmatization. You can do a good job as a single mother, but that doesn't make it an ideal. Certainly not a societal ideal.
You mentioning narcissism again. I mean, do we think that individualism has turned into narcissism and that there is a greater prevalence of narcissism in today's society?
Jean Twenge has made that case. She's quite a good social personality psychologist.
I mean, you've described Trudeau as a narcissist. Would you describe, for instance, Harry and Meghan as narcissists?
I have to tread lightly with such categorization, being a clinical psychologist.
Well,
you know, I'll leave myself to speculation. Well, Twenge is the best source on this, and she believes, and I think there's some truth in this, is that the hyper-emphasis, for example, on the development of self-esteem at all costs in the education system, which was a pathology generated by the faculties of education, you know, damn their hides, has produced a more a generation of young people who are tilted more in a narcissistic direction.
Can I just ask you about multiculturalism?
Yeah.
Because we have witnessed some extraordinary scenes on the streets of London.
Yeah.
We've had the call for an intifada from London to Gaza. We've got a huge amount of division at the moment between some sectors of the Muslim community and Jews.
Yeah.
We've seen an uplift in Islamophobia and in anti-Semitism in recent times. Does that suggest that multiculturalism has failed?
Well, there was no such thing as multicultural philosophy. It's so puerile and moralizing and unsophisticated that it's kind of a miracle of stupidity. I mean, first of all, we've always had a multicultural world. That's why there's been wars, right? So along with multiculturalism goes wars when the cultures don't get along. So what happens when you import that? Well, two things. You either import that under a unifying rubric, which would be something like the melting pot in the United States, or you retain the multicultural divisions. Okay, and you might say, well, we benefit from the diversity, which is arguably true. You know, I mean, when I came to London in the 1980s, I went to a reasonably good restaurant and I was fed canned spaghetti. You know, the food here was, to call it dismal was an absolute compliment. And so one of the benefits of multiculturalism has been a radical diversification, let's say, in cuisine, and that's a huge benefit. But if you think you can import multitude of cultures without a unifying rubric and not import the problem of interpersonal and social conflict, you're either blind or stupid or both. And both's a dreadful combination. So, like, on what basis does multiculturalism become peace? You wave some magic wand and all of a sudden everybody gives up their cultural differences and can live in harmony? Harmony defined by what? Is there some unifying harmony? Well, if there's some unifying harmony, then multiculturalism isn't the solution. It's like unity through diversity, you know, peace through war. You know, it's a preposterous claim. It's foolish in its extreme. And then when there's tension, like there is in the world now, well, you see the rifts emerge. And why wouldn't they? Especially if you're telling people, you know, adhere to the dictates of your previous culture.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just...
A couple more quick questions, because I know we're pushed for time. Would a Biden or Trump administration next time round be better for the Western world?
I mean, if someone put a gun to my head, I'd pick Trump. If there was a gun to my head, track record. You know, no war under his administration, and he brought in the Abraham Accords.
Yeah.
Well, I would be pretty happy with another 4 years of no war and an extension of the Abraham Accords. Does that mean that Trump would be my preferred candidate? No. And I'm not pleased with Biden for a variety of reasons, not least, and this is something particularly salient at the moment, the Saudis, I believe, and I have reason to believe this, I believe they would have signed the Abraham Accords 2 years ago.
Yeah.
If Biden would have been willing to give Trump some credit. And I believe the Democrats didn't pursue Saudi Arabia at that point because it would have been inconvenient to give Trump credit. And so they isolated and alienated him when they could have given him some credit. He might have just ridden off into the sunset if he'd got some credit for what he had done. But they turned him into the monster they needed to fulmigate against, and now they have the monster back. And now we have the situation in Israel, right, where Iran is using Hamas to agitate the Islamic world against Saudi Arabia, essentially. As far as I can tell, that's what's going on. So I'm not very happy with the Biden administration because of that. And I'm also not happy with the Democrat inability to deal with the woke left. You know, when the squad run by AOC was promoting the pro-Hamas demonstrations in New York, the White House spokeswoman did come out and denounce them. That was the first time in years, 6 years, and I've talked to many Democrats, where I actually saw the Democrats draw a line. I've asked 40 Democrats that I've talked to, some on my podcast, when does the left go too far? Not one of them would answer. Not one. Not even Robert Kennedy. He said, I'm not trying to run a divisive campaign. It's like, fair enough, you know, but you could draw a line between you and the communist psychopaths,
yes.
You know. So
that would be a good start.
Well, hey.
Final question. Which of your 12 rules for life do you think is the most important?
Tell the truth, or at least don't lie. Yeah, you know, if people are wondering, even people who labor under the burden of genuine oppression, if they're wondering what they can do to set the world right, one of the things you can do to set the world right that you could do is you could stop lying.
Stop lying. Good advice to our politicians, I think. That was the clinical psychologist and best-selling author Jordan Peterson speaking to me earlier in the week. You can watch an extended version of the interview on GB News' YouTube channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. Okay, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows,
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Now, as promised, I'm joined now by top Tory, veteran Tory David Davis. He's the MP for Halton, Price and Howden. David, I wanted you to reflect first of all on the COVID inquiry. It made the headlines in the week, most notably for Dominic Cummings's fruity use of language. But are you, like me, a bit worried that this inquiry isn't going to really deliver the findings that we need. It seems to be obsessed with sort of the triviality of the infighting in number 10 and not really answering any proper questions on our pandemic preparedness, whether we would be able to avoid a similar crisis in the future, and whether indeed the modelling that was relied upon for the decisions made around lockdown was accurate and should have been relied upon. Should we have taken a more Swedish approach? I haven't heard any of these answers yet. I don't know about you.
Well, the one person who's, I think, talked about it at all is Mark Woolhouse. It's the best evidence anywhere. And I recommend your viewers to look up Mr. Woolhouse, Woolhouse. He's a professor of epidemiology in Scotland, in Edinburgh, and he's actually very sensible. But you're dead right. I mean, this KC, I've forgotten his name, who's doing all the cross-questioning, is strong on theatre and completely absent on forensic analysis. I mean, he deals with witnesses really from a very polar point of view. He was very nice to the deputy cabinet secretary. He was ferocious in his questioning, if it was really questioning, of Cummings. Now, look, I am absolutely the least the last person in the world to be a fan of Dominic Cummings, but I don't think it was an intelligent cross-questioning at all. All it was about was his swearing. Well, frankly, what does that matter? I mean, all right, it makes great TV and it's fun to watch, but actually this inquiry is about stopping us making the same mistakes next time.
Yes.
I mean, inquiries always want to pass all the blame.
Yes.
And if you can do that, there's the wrong way to do it anyway. But it's about stopping it happening again to the tune of hundreds of thousands of lives. That's what rides on this. And it's done not a single thing to actually advance that cause. You're right. Where's the analysis of the previous preparation? I was in cabinet when Operation Cygnus, I think it's called, was reported back on. It was a hopeless exercise. Only spent about 20 minutes in cabinet. I actually said, I think I was the only other cabinet minister other than Jeremy Hunt who spoke, and the Prime Minister. And I just said, we need to spend a whole day on this, not 20 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, I know you're no fan of Boris Johnson, David, but at the same time, with such a lack of preparedness, wouldn't any Prime Minister have found themselves in a pickle when it came to actually handling this pandemic?
Yes, they would. There's no doubt about it, because nobody was prepared for it. The rest of the world was essentially copying China. I never thought I'd ever say those words.
Yeah.
Was essentially copying China. We very nearly... and if we'd gone on our sort of previous scientific advice, we very nearly followed the Swedish route. But we buckled. We panicked. For about 10 days, we panicked. And if I want to blame Boris for anything, it would be for that. It would be for letting his people panic. The truth is, a lot of this has been posed, by the way, as sort of lockdown versus nothing. And of course, that in itself is stupid. Because actually it's a whole range of options. The Swedes didn't go on partying every day throughout COVID. They behave with common sense. They stopped mass gatherings, big sports events and whatever, and they made some of the same mistakes as us. But, they went a common sense route. We could have sold that to the public. The other argument, of course, has been put is, oh, well, we just followed the public, which is probably true. We could have sold the argument to the public, look, don't do this. Don't do this. Let's just protect the elderly. Let's just protect the people in care homes. That would be a good idea for a start. Let's make sure we do proper research and do what we did properly on, which was successful on vaccines and so on. There was a middle way in all this, and actually the middle way would probably have been worth tens of thousands of lives and millions of people's futures. I'm thinking of children and university students. None of that has surfaced in this. Inquiry at all. Frankly, if it goes on like this, I'd cancel the blasted inquiry. It really is not. It's going to cost hundreds of millions of pounds, and it's not going to do anything.
And also, let's reflect on the fact that Sweden's inquiry is already concluded and lessons have been learned. Let's just move on to the Mail on Sunday. I don't know if you've seen it, David. Lots more allegations from Nadine Dorries. We've already heard from her talking about Michael Gove Cabal bringing down IDS. You were obviously one of his opponents for the leadership in those days, so perhaps you've got a comment on whether that's true. Also, these quite serious allegations to suggest, quotes from the headlines, the Tory party covered up for serial rapist MP. Do we need an investigation? Oliver Dowden was party chairman at the time, claims no knowledge of this.
Yeah, all I've seen the headlines. I haven't read the actual article. But well, if there is serious evidence of a cover-up, then it should be exposed. There's no two ways about it. It's a rape case, isn't it? From what I heard, or an alleged case. Well, you know, there's no argument in the world that can support covering up such a thing if it's true. Now, I know literally zero about that. But obviously, if covering up a case like that is a criminal offence in its own right.
Yeah.
So it's probably a matter for the police, not for people.
Indeed. I'm going to be back next week at 9:30, but up next it's my paper reviewer extraordinaire, Michael Portillo.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vaughtry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. There are a few showers to watch out throughout this bonfire night, particularly for western areas. They could be still heavy at times, pushing their way in across particularly northwest England, western Wales, through the Bristol Channel as well. Western areas of Scotland not escaping either. Into the second half of the night, we could just see a few beginning to skirt their way into Sussex and Kent, but a lot of other eastern areas will remain largely dry with some clear intervals. Underneath that, some mist and fog possible. It will also turn relatively chilly, particularly so for eastern Scotland, where we can expect some frost. So quite a chilly start to the new working week here. But as we head into Monday, it is a day of sunshine and showers for many. Those showers most frequent in the west once again, perhaps a few rumbles of thunder, maybe some hail in those heaviest ones as well. Into the afternoon, just starting to see those showers progress into eastern areas of England, but still with a good amount of sunshine in between them. Temperatures around 10 to 13 degrees Celsius, so fairly pleasant if you are in those sunnier spots. For Tuesday, it will again start relatively showery, but we've got this ridge of high pressure that's going to be moving its way in during the day. That will gradually help to ease off the showers, particularly for western areas as we head into the afternoon. So